Now I am honored to welcome our honored guest, Dr. Andrew Charlton.
Well, friends, what a pleasure to be here in Delhi with you. I feel here at the Delhi study group that my wife and I are amongst friends, like-minded people committed to the advancement of India and the promotion of the Australia-India relationship. Thank you so much for welcoming us, and thank you for being here. In particular, thank you so much, Vijay Jolly. I have heard so much about you, and it is an honour to be here and meeting you in person. And I look forward on your next trip to Australia, which I think you said will be your 39th trip. I look forward to hosting you myself in Australia, although maybe I'll wait for the trip after that, which will be your 40th trip. Maybe that will be more auspicious. I also want to acknowledge Dr. Lamba. Thank you for your very generous and kind words. Mr. Balliar Singh, and there are so many dignitaries and people here who have come from far, from close, and I'm very honoured that so many esteemed people would join us tonight for this event. In the Australian Parliament, I have a couple of jobs. And one of those jobs is to be the chair of the Parliamentary Friends of India. And our role as a parliamentary group is to promote good relations between Australia and India and bring our two great democracies closer together. Now, earlier today I was chatting to an Indian colleague who said to me that Australia is very far from India. We are more than 6,000 kilometres away. And I said, well, from an Indian perspective, that is very far away. But for an Australian, that's actually very close. Most countries are 10,000, 20,000 kilometres away from Australia. So India, for us, is like our near neighbour. And it's a relationship that Australia takes very seriously. It's a relationship that has grown enormously over the last 20 years. As 𝗂𝗍 said, many Australians don't have a full understanding of the enormous growth and sophistication of India as an economy, as a nation, and as a technology powerhouse. And one of my jobs as the Parliamentary Friends of India Chair, and one of the purposes of writing the book that we have been talking about tonight, Australia's Pivot to India, is to make Australians better understand the economic, cultural and geopolitical powerhouse that is India. Australians are learning three things about India. Firstly, they learned this year that India became the largest nation in the world by population. And not only is it the largest nation in the world by population, but its workforce is so young, its population is growing so quickly, that by 2050, India's population will be larger than the United States and China combined. This fact is dawning on Australia. Secondly, Australians are learning that India has the fastest economic growth of any major nation. It has lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty and growing at 7%, 8%, whereas many of the big nations of the world are growing at 2%, 1%, or not growing at all. And the third thing that Australians are learning about India is that it has the fastest growing military capability in the world, becoming a strong powerhouse and an important security partner, promoting peace and stability in the Asia-Pacific region. And friends, when Australians put these three facts together, I say to them, what do you think this means for the future? And I'll tell you what it means. It means that in India, Australia has a partner who is not just a global superpower, but on that trajectory of population growth and economic growth and security growth, could be a preeminent superpower in the world and our region in the 21st century. And I'll say this, and I write this in the book, that just as the 19th century was dominated by the British, and the 20th century was Pax Americana, so we may well end the 21st century with India on top. And what this means for Australia is that we have a friend, a fellow democratic nation, a nation who shares much of our history, our geography in the Indian Ocean, cultural ties, sporting ties. We have a friend who will be a positive force in the world. Now, my wife and I are delighted to be here in Delhi, but I have to admit to you that being here in Delhi and watching our book today was not the primary purpose of our visit. The primary purpose of our visit to India was to bring our children to India for a family holiday. And over the last 2 weeks, we have had the joy of travelling through India, principally Rajasthan, from Jaipur to Udaipur to Jodhpur. My children clambered up forts, they marvelled at bejewelled palaces, they enjoyed fantastic food and incredibly warm hospitality everywhere we went. It has been a joy for us to introduce our children to India, and I'm sure it will be the first for them of many trips coming back. One of the things that I have taken away from our trip, though, is the strength and the warmth between Australia and India. And when I meet people in the streets, they have a strong affection for Australia, and I tell you what, that affection is returned. And it's returned at every level in Australia. Do you know that Australia is one of only 2 countries with whom India has the following 3 things? 1, a security relationship through the Quad. 2, an economic relationship through the Free Trade Agreement. And 3, annual leaders' meetings. Only one of 2 nations, there's only one other nation that has those 3 things. And that puts the relationship between Australia and India in a very special category. It means that we have the foundations to build a very strong relationship together. And I'll tell you what, this year we had, in the last year we had Prime Minister Modi visit Australia for a fantastic visit where he was celebrated by more than 20,000 people in a stadium very close to my electorate. And he received a rapturous welcome in Australia. And his visit was the 2nd time that Prime Minister Modi has visited Australia during his prime ministership. And that makes him the first Indian Prime Minister ever to visit Australia twice. And in the last year, Prime Minister Albanese visited India 2 times. And that makes him the first Australian Prime Minister ever to visit India twice in 1 year. In fact, in the last year, we had 13 ministerial visits from Australia to India, a record. And this shows you the strength and the depth of the relationship between Australia and India. But friends, there is something else that's important in our relationship. And Deepa mentioned this. It is the million-strong Indian diaspora in Australia. And I'm so honoured to have some friends of mine from Australia here today, 𝗙𝗵𝗲𝗯𝗓, Sanjay Deshwal, Jitesh Rao, and others. The Indian community in Australia has delivered an enormous amount to the growing Australian nation. Indian Australians have an education rate that is unparalleled across the Australian community. More than 64% of Indian Australians have a university degree. That's compared with 28% across Australia for all Australians. Nearly twice as likely to have an educational degree. But as Deepa said, Australia can do more to support Indians in Australia. Because not only do they have much higher levels of qualifications, they're also much more likely to be employed in jobs that do not use those qualifications. So we have more to do as a nation to make sure that the huge contribution that Indian Australians make to Australia are recognised and valued in Australia. And one of the ways that we're doing that on a small level is to promote Sydney as a cultural centre of Indian culture. And right in the middle of my lecturate, we are building Little India. It's been a centre of South Asian culture for a long time. But when Prime Minister Modi came to Australia, he gave us the great honour of officially declaring that part of Parramatta Little India. The first Little India in Australia. And I want to acknowledge all the people, particularly Sanjay Deshwal and Sanjay Patel, who have worked on this so hard for such a long period of time. And this creates a little beacon of Indian culture right in the heart of Sydney. And I encourage you, on all of your visits, Vijay, on your 39th and 40th and 41st visit, you must come to Little India in Parramatta, where you would be our honoured guest. I want to finish by throwing out a challenge. Because as good as the Australia-India relationship is, friends, it can be better. It can be better. We have achieved a lot, and the leadership of Prime Minister Modi has delivered the strongest relationship between Australia and India ever. But there is more that we can do. We can do more trade together, and we have many distinguished business people in this room who have relationships with Australia. There is a lot more that we can do. We can do a lot more in investment, building businesses across the Indian Ocean that span Australia and India. We can do a lot more in building deep partnerships. And for me, that's our challenge. In the next 5 years, to take a relationship which is a strong friendship and build it into a true partnership. We have all the foundations there. We have the free trade agreement. That is not an end in itself. The point of the free trade agreement isn't to exist, it's to promote trade. The point of our security relationship through the Quad isn't to have a relationship, it's to build peace and stability. The point of our growing friendship and investment relationship isn't to exist for its own sake, it's to promote prosperity and stability in the world. And so that is our challenge. I see that challenge as us doubling trade between Australia and India in the next 5 years, tripling the investment between Australia and India, and promoting much stronger people-to-people links. I'll conclude by saying that it has been such a joy for my family to travel through India over the last few weeks. We have visited forts and palaces and temples. We visited the Jain temple in Jaipur. We visited the Ashram in Delhi, and we look forward in the not too distant future to visiting this magnificent temple and paying our respects to the great tradition of Hinduism and the strength of India as it grows through the 21st century to become a true partner of Australia and a true global superpower. Thank you very much.
She is the spouse of Dr. Andrew. And she is not only a spouse, she is also a barrister. Barrister 𝗂𝗽𝗍. Is that right? And so I would request you also to give her a big